Hey, Jason, stand up for us so we all of us know who you are real quick. This is, mic's on. Yeah. That's Jason. Jason's our youth pastor, by the way. Jason, do you need more snacks?
Yes.
Jason, do you need leaders?
Yes.
You want to make a difference. How many kids did you have this last week?
38.
38 kids. If you want to make a difference, well, I got one way for you. My name is Mike Basil. Good morning. I'm so glad to be with you here in person and online, I guess, right? So, yeah. So used to doing the announcements at the beginning, right? So we say person and online, but I'm so glad you're here this morning. During the last few weeks, we have been unpacking this Gospel of Matthew. We've been in this series called The Good News According to St. Matthew. And it's been our goal during these last few weeks to really help set some context. So each week, unpacking a little bit of the history of the Gospel of Matthew to help you understand not only what's being said, but who it's being said to. Oftentimes when we read the Gospel of Matthew, it's easy for us to just read it as a story, but we oftentimes forget this was written to a specific audience. And our hope during this series was also to put you in the place of that first century Jewish audience, to hear the text as they would have heard it, because it gives us a different perspective of what God is trying to say. So I know that during these last 3 weeks, you have become Matthean scholars, right? You guys remember everything we've talked about, right? Yeah? I don't hear a lot of confidence out there. But you know what? Just to make sure you've been listening, I have a little quiz for us. So let's put it up on the screen. Here we go. There we go. Bible trivia night or day. What we're going to do is there are going to be 10 questions on the screen, and then you're going to answer 1, 2, or 3. This is the deaf way of doing it, 1, 2, or 3. See that? It's easier than this. The answer is never going to be 3, so I want to give you guys some confidence, okay? So 1 or 2. And we're going to see how much of this gospel you remember. So question 1, here we go. Yeah, we're ready now. All right. Who was the Gospel of Matthew written for? Was it the Jewish people? Was it pirates searching for treasure? Or was it time travelers from the future? Okay, let's, 1, 2, or 3? One. All right, let's see what the correct answer is. You guys were paying attention. I'm proud of you. Yeah. All right, number 2, here we go. What are the meek promised in the Beatitudes? This is from the Sermon on the Mount. So is it a new bicycle? Is it the earth? Or is it a lifetime supply of ice cream? 1, 2, or 3? 2. What is it? It is 2. It's the earth. Good job. All right, 2 for 2. Let's do number 3. What does Jesus say we should be like to show God's love? Is it 1, salt and light, 2, ketchup and mustard, or 3, sugar and spice and everything nice? 1, 2, or 3? 1, and the answer is... You guys are so smart. I'm so proud of you right now. All right, number 4. What should you do if someone asks for your coat according to Jesus? Should you give them your coat and your shirt? Say finders keepers? Or should you turn into a superhero and fly away? 1, 2, or 3? 1. And the answer is 1. Great job. Okay, 4 for 4. Let's keep this train going. What does Jesus say his yoke is like? Is it heavy and painful? Is it easy and light, or is it made of cheese? 1, 2, or 3? 2. Easy and light is the correct answer. All right, you guys have been paying attention. Good job. All right, number 6, here we go. What do some people criticize Jesus and his disciples for not doing? Is it washing their hands, doing the dishes, or cleaning their rooms? 2 and 3 are clear for my disciples, but Jesus' disciples, it was 1. Washing their hands. Good job. 7, according to Jesus, what defiles a person? Is it what comes out of their mouth, what they wear, or eating with a fork and knife only? If you're from the Midwest, you probably only eat food with a fork and knife like my wife. It's weird. But what's the answer, 1, 2, or 3? 1, and the answer is 1. 70%, you guys. Okay, here we go. This is for our B students next. Number 8. And this is, were you paying attention this morning to the reading? Who were the first people to see Jesus, who were the first people to see that Jesus was not in the tomb? Was it Mary Magdalene and the other Mary? Aliens from Mars or Batman and Robin? 1, 2, or 3? You guys were paying attention during the reading. That's really good. That was a difficult one. Number 9. What does Jesus tell his disciples to do after he rose from the dead? Was it to go fishing, to make disciples of all nations, or to start a rock band? 1, 2, 3? 2. And the answer is 2. All right. How many of you got 9 out of 9 so far? I'm impressed. Okay, let's see if we get 10 out of 10. Here we go. What does Jesus promise at the end of Matthew 28? 1, he will be with us always. 2, he will send postcards. Or 3, he will bring everyone a pet unicorn. 1, 2, or 3? 1, and the answer is, how many got 100%? I'm impressed. You guys have been paying attention. We've come a long way in this journey through Matthew. You know, we started with the idea that the Gospel of Matthew was given to an audience of first century Jewish believers who were wrestling with what to do with the way of Jesus. Remember, Jesus had come, he had spoken to them, this clear idea of what it was to be a follower of Jesus, but they were wrestling with how to incorporate that into their Jewish identities. And we have to also remember that this audience was in the midst of a lot of turmoil. This message comes to the audience, these Jewish readers, 40 to 50 years after Jesus had come and died and resurrected. They had seen things like the temple's destruction, and this audience is wrestling with, what do we do with this stuff now? Jesus came and he starts presenting these different ideas of who's in, who's out, reshaping how followers of Christ are supposed to follow, or what a good person looks like. You know, in the first week, we looked at the Sermon on the Mount, right? And we heard this idea of who was blessed and who was not blessed. And normally the people that we think of blessed were not the ones that Jesus mentioned. For example, how many of you guys feel blessed when you're at the end of your rope? How many of you feel blessed when you've lost what's most dear to you? How about, do you feel blessed when people persecute you for what you believe? Jesus was shaking things up. And one of my favorite lines from that Sermon on the Mount is, "You've heard it said, but now I tell you." You've heard it said that, don't murder, but there's so much more to that you're missing. Jesus is challenging this community of Jewish believers on how to live this idea of faith out in this new way. Jesus was also challenging them with who was in, who was out. Because you see, as people, we love to draw lines. We love to draw lines, and oftentimes we are not on the other side of those lines, right? And Matthew is speaking to this diverse group of Jews on how to integrate Gentiles, how to integrate the outsider into this originally Jewish movement. We read stories about how Matthew deals with this tension just last week, talking about the Canaanite woman. And Canaanite woman and Jesus' disciples, right? And Rustin never took a clear stand on this issue, so I'm going to take a clear stand on this issue today, okay? Yes, you should always wash your hands before you eat. Thank you. You can send all the letters and postcards to Rustin this week. But that's where we ended. We ended at chapter 15, and we skipped over a ton. And now we're at chapter 28, the very end. We skipped over things like miracles and parables. We skipped over the transfiguration. We skipped over the Last Supper, where we institute this idea of the Eucharist or communion. We skipped over crucifixion and death and resurrection, leading us to this moment, Matthew 28. And a lot is going on in this chapter, as you heard. You notice the different events. If you've read the narrative of Jesus' life post-resurrection, the events are kind of different in the way Matthew presents them. But we see that Matthew is continuing to turn things upside down. Who does the angel appear to first? It's the women. It's the only people that never leave Jesus' side. They were at the cross. They were at the death. They were at the burial. Notice who faints. It's the guards. They fall over like dead, but yet the women are there, okay. And they're hearing this story now of go share this message with my disciples. There's this little conspiracy that Matthew throws in there, and I love a good conspiracy about the guards and the chief priest saying, okay, now go say that Jesus, body was stolen. Here's some money. It's awesome. It's funny. But also there's this little part. Go tell my disciples, meet me in Galilee. And that's what I want to read to you again. Matthew 28:16, it says this. This is a slightly different translation. It says, but the 11 disciples proceeded to Galilee, to the mountain which Jesus had designated to them. And when they saw him, they worshiped him, but some were doubtful. And Jesus came up and spoke to them, saying, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to follow all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. Verses 16, 17, and 18, we see Matthew do something a little different in these verses. In verse 16, we see this is the first place and the only place in the Gospel of Matthew where Matthew uses this phrase, the 11. Throughout the Gospel, it's always the 12, the 12, the 12. And Matthew brings us to this place where there's 11 now. A reminder of who's there and who's not there. They go to this mountain and they worship. And I want you to hold on to this idea, okay? Hold on to the mountain and worship idea for later, okay? We'll get back to that. But I love this next part. But some were doubtful. Some were doubtful. This word can also mean to hesitate or to question. But Jesus has done this great work and the disciples are there, and yet even there, some doubt. Again, if we remember the audience that Matthew is written to, we might understand why he includes this. A first century Jew, 40 to 50 years after the resurrection, Jesus has come, the Messiah has come, and he's left. And the idea was if the Messiah came, when he came back, he was to set up his kingdom. He was to change the world into this messianic reign. And all of a sudden, 50 years later, and they're still waiting, nothing has happened. And not only that, they've witnessed the destruction of the temple. The place they went to worship this God is destroyed. Jesus talks about how no stone would be left upon another, and this thing was just burned to the ground. And you have this audience probably wrestling with that same doubt. But some doubted. Verse 18 goes into this, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. And I'm not going to get into that little phrase. There's lots of sermons and lots to unpack on that. I'm going to leave that up to Rustin for another time, okay? But we're going to skip ahead to verse 19. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all the nations. I grew up and I was originally ordained in a denomination where the Great Commission, so these verses that we're reading, and Acts 1:8 were like our core foundation, okay? This is what we lived on. And there was this idea that we had to go and make disciples. Once a month in the tradition I grew up, there was always a traveling missionary or evangelist that would come. And they would always speak on this passage. And they always say, okay, now you have to go. And there was always this fear of like, where do I have to go? And I was talking to my wife, Julianne, about this text this week, and she was reminded of when her mom said, this go meant, you know what, if you respond to this go, you're going to end up in a third world country eating monkey brains somewhere. And I'm like, your mom probably watched too much Indiana Jones, okay? And this go can be scary. It seems like this imperative that we're supposed to leave everything behind and go away and do something. But there's another translation to this go. This go also means, as you are going, as you are living your life, as you are dropping your kids off at school or picking them up, as you're waiting in line for something, as you're at the grocery store, as you're golfing, as you're on vacation, as you're doing this thing called life, that's what this go is saying. In those moments, you are to do what? Make disciples. See, disciples were something that typically what rabbis did, right? Teachers of the law. They would have these groups of people and you would make disciples, you would mentor and mold them for years, and then they would follow and teach what you taught. And what's interesting here is this. Jesus is passing on that to the people gathered around at this moment. The believers, the doubters, the hesitant. You go and make disciples. You see, it's not just the pastor's job. It's not just someone who went to seminary's job. It's not someone who gets up here on a weekend and talks about this stuff. It's our job. It's your job. Jesus is passing this on to everyone who's with him. Go, make disciples. And who are we supposed to make disciples of? All the nations. This word here is much broader. It's ethnos. It means all races. It means everything. You see, Jesus is taking the lines that you and I have drawn and he's erasing them. He's saying the things and the people that you think are outside of God's grace, you've got it wrong. They're not. Because you see, your lines are not God's lines. There's no room for enemies. There's no room for there's no room for outsiders. Jesus is saying, go and make disciples of everyone. And how do we do that? By baptizing and teaching. So baptizing here doesn't mean taking your bottle of water and sprinkling it on people as you go throughout the day. Jesus is not saying that. We have to understand what baptism meant to this audience who's reading this text. And to that audience, baptism was a sign of covenant, a sign of allowing people into your world. You know, when we do baptism here at St. Matthew, we make baptismal covenants with the people there. We say, we are responsible for you and you are responsible for us. And there's this deep connection that we say. And that's what Jesus is saying. He's saying, as you go and make disciples, bring them in. Bring them into your home. Bring them into your life. They are a part of who you are. There, again, is no other, no outsider. We're on the same team. We're in the same family. And we're supposed to teach them. And what are we supposed to teach them? Well, Matthew's given us 28 chapters of what to teach them. Jesus loves them. That blessed are they when they have hard times and are struggling. That God won't leave them. That there's no more outsiders. That this message of grace goes beyond our walls. And I love this part. It says, and behold, and behold. Elias, our second kid, we have 4, it's crazy. But our second one, he had this hard time of focusing. And so when he was a little guy, breastfeeding and things like that, he would be distracted by any little sound, light, or anything going on. To the point where Juliana had to lock herself in a room away from everything. And it had to be dark. And when he got older, that didn't change. And so when he was 2 and 3, to get his attention or to get him to do anything, we literally had to grab his face and look him in the eyes and say, focus. And Jesus is doing that here. He's saying, look, behold. He's saying, focus. I get it. It's hard. It's difficult. I'm asking a lot. But guess what? I am with you always. The end of the age. When you hear the I am part, What are you reminded of? This is the part where you can talk back. Anything? Anyone? Huh? Grace. Yahweh. You know, again, this is written to a Jewish audience who would immediately have recognized those words, I am, because they would go back and hear that same statement mentioned back in Exodus. Exodus 3:12 says this, and he said, certainly I will be with you, and this will be a sign to you that it is I who have sent you. And when you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain. They would be reminded of this promise of I am. This God who is not afar off, but this I am. Remember when Moses had this I am moment, this relationship was between God and Moses, but now Jesus is saying these same words to his disciples, and he's saying, I am with you. No longer is this relationship just set to one person. It's now set to the community of believers who begin to follow Jesus. I am with you. And Matthew, just a few chapters earlier, says this. He says, when 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, what? I am with you. And Matthew, at the very beginning of his gospel, says this. He says, behold, the virgin shall be with child. She will bear a son. And they will call his name Emmanuel, which translated means God is with us. I am with you always, to the end of the age. Go, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them, teaching them, because I am with you. Not only is this an encouragement for those gathered at that moment, it's an encouragement for us. It speaks deeper. Remember who's gathered again? It's not only the believers, it's also the doubters. It's this first century Jewish audience wrestling with this idea of how do we incorporate this Jesus into our way of life that's so different? How do we remove our lines and our barriers and allow other into relationship? For that first century Jewish audience, things were looking bleak. And they needed that reminder that God was with them in the midst of their chaos. Maybe this morning you need that same reminder that in the midst of your chaos, God is with you. And then Matthew ends his gospel, and that's how we'll end today. Amen.